Hello, everyone. I'm Professor Geek. Welcome back to the channel, and welcome finally to another Star Wars EU book study. If you've been following along, or if you're new to the channel, you might not know because we haven't had one of these published in a while, but we've been doing book studies. I have my co-host Big Al on, and we've been going through Star Wars EU books because no one talks about the EU anymore. It's really sad, other than some niche channels, some great channels that you should check out. But everyone talks about Disney's nonsense Star Wars stuff, and I wanted to keep the Star Wars EU books and stuff alive. So we have been doing studies of novels, comics, and whatnot, and I lead it as a book study because I'm a literature professor. Now we don't go too crazy deep, but I do like to pull out some things that I think writers can learn from, but also just readers can learn about to say, oh, that's what the writer's doing here. That helps it. It's a little more interesting, and they can better compare books to others and so forth. So we've done a good handful of them. We did start out the Star Wars EU book studies with the Thrawn trilogy, which is where I would recommend anybody start if they just want to jump into the Star Wars EU wonderful books and novels, comics, games, and so forth. Start with the Thrawn trilogy by Timothy Zahn. We've done a number of books since then. Al, my co-host, he likes to listen to these books on Audible while he reads them. So we've been so far trying to keep to books that have unabridged copies on Audible. And thankfully, Disney has finally started to slowly release a lot more of these unabridged recordings, because for a long time, the good classic EU books, you could only ever find an abridged audio if you're going the audio route. But they finally are starting to release just a couple more titles here and there each, quarter or something like that. One of them they released recently, a good unabridged audio version of, is Outbound Flight. This is by Timothy Zahn, the same man who wrote the Thrawn trilogy, the creator of Admiral Thrawn. This is a book that is the first appearance of Thrawn in the EU continuity. In terms of chronology, rather. The Thrawn trilogy was published before this. The Thrawn duology, the Hand of Thrawn duology, was published before this. We've talked about the Thrawn trilogy, so that's what we'll reference as we go through Outbound Flight. We haven't done a study on the Hand of Thrawn duology yet. Technically, that was written before this one, so we're not really going to mention that, though, just because we haven't come to it in our studies yet, so we're not going to spoil anything for that. But you don't need to have read anything to read Outbound Flight. It's a great book. Now, Al and I, if you follow the channel, you know that we were talking about starting this a while ago, but we recorded our talk of the first 3 chapters, and we had some audio issues. Then I got busy with a bunch of things. I think Al's got his audio issues figured out now, so we're going to try it again. But instead of re-recording everything we'd already talked about in those first 3 chapters, I thought, let me go ahead and just do a video kind of summing up the themes of the first 3 chapters, so you can get an idea if you're new to these book studies, or if you think, hey, maybe I'd like to jump in on that. What I'm going to talk about in these first 3 chapters isn't really necessarily going to spoil the whole book for you. You can stop the video and go read those 3 chapters of Timothy Zahn's Outbound Flight, or you can just listen to them and see if this sounds like something you'd like to get in on. Then you can go ahead and go read the next 3 chapters if you want to join us for the next installment, which would be about a week or so away. So, Star Wars Outbound Flight, you do have to be careful when you look up Star Wars Thrawn content, because Timothy Zahn, the same author, has now been writing Thrawn stuff for the Disney continuity, the Disney canon nonsense. So, for example, I made that mistake when I was first getting into the EU myself. I'd read the Thrawn trilogy. I was like, this is great. And I asked somebody at selling books, I was like, so where's the first appearance of Thrawn? And they pointed me to the Disney nonsense book, But it was interesting because I read that book before even realizing this isn't EU canon, it's Disney canon, silly, stupid mistake just getting into the EU. But having read that book and now reading or having read Outbound Flight, this is my 3rd time through it, I think. I can see the comparison between the two, and the Outbound Flight, the EU treatment of Thrawn is just so far superior to the Disney's treatment of Thrawn. It really is a different character. So if you're coming into this and the only Thrawn you know about is that character they talk about in Rebels or the Ahsoka, nonsense show or whatever, it's really just not the same character. I mean, this Thrawn is a mastermind, genius, very Apollonian, chilling villain. Space Dracula in a lot of ways you might call him, not with the blood sucking, but just that cunning and the on the hunt and so forth for what he wants and what he wants to plan on and scheme for. So it's a different kind of thing. Now, Outbound Flight takes place during the Clone Wars, and every book that Timothy Zahn writes for the EU, I don't know if he still does this for the Disney, but for every EU book he wrote, he always started with black space and then a ship enters. Usually in the Thrawn trilogy, it was a ship. It was one of the Empire ships coming in, because that's the way the original Star Wars movies, the original trilogy, all open. I am going to be kind of cursory here. I'm going to just sort of sum this up because I don't want to spend too much time in just this video. We will take a little more time going through things when we do chapters 4 through 6 next time when Al is with me. But in chapter 1, we meet this character. We're in the perspective of this character named Cardass, who is on a ship with a group of smugglers. There's two other, there's the captain of the ship, and then there's this woman who's maybe the captain's girlfriend, but certainly his second in command. Who knows? They're on this ship. They're running from a hut. So immediate tension, that begins a story in what's called in medias res, beginning in the middle of the action. And that's a good thing to do. You are faced with the challenge of getting some exposition going, and you can't halt the tension or the action just to give an exposition dump. You need to keep the action going, but figure out how to work exposition into the dialogue or into the story, in some sort of way. But we start out with that tension, and Cardass, even though he's on a smuggler's ship, he's a young guy, he's new to the ship, and he's smart. You get the sense already that he's smarter than even his captain. And he's suggesting, well, let's do this because they're on the run from these huts. These huts know that that the captain has tried to swindle them. You don't swindle a hut, obviously. And Cardass is like, what were you thinking? Talking to his captain. And it's just ridiculous there. They make a jump. They jump away. And the pros, so we got, we're in the middle of tension, and then they escape. Okay. And the pros even says the star lines collapsed back into stars, and Cardass keyed for a sensor reading. And that's the end of the sentence. And then the next sentence starts, and jerked. So it's not even a complete sentence because you're relying on the subject of the previous sentence. Well, if you're going to break grammatical rules like that as a fiction writer, you have to have a reason for it. And his reason here is really kind of leading you through the tension. Okay, we're in a tense moment. Okay, they've escaped. Okay, they're through they made the hyperspace jump. Star lines are collapsed back into the stars. Everything's fine. He keys for a sensor reading, and jerked, and jumped. You're supposed to feel that as you're reading through the way that the prose is written. That's a good handling of the language, because that's what this first scene does. Cardass jumps, and they realize soon, a second or two later, that the huts have been somehow able to track them because the huts jumped with them, and the huts are right there, still attacking them. Some of their ship is a bit damaged in this fight. They try to jump again. Cardass is uncertain. He can't even key for plan a good jump point. So he just points to where there are no stars and jumps in that direction, which of course is very dangerous if you know the ways how that hyper jumps work and whatnot in Star Wars. They find that they can't stop jumping. There's something wrong with the hyperdrive, and it continues to jump. So that they're far outside of known space at this point. They've passed the outer rim, and they're in unknown space. They finally stop. So, oh my gosh, well, okay, we got away, but what's going on now? Then the huts attack them again. The huts have tracked them even through that massive quantity of hyperjumps in space. So once again, their intention. So you can see how the tension of the opening story, there's danger. Okay, they get away. Oh, there's more danger. Okay, they get away. Oh, now they're not even in known space. Oh, wait, now the huts are still attacking them. It's ramping up. And then enter the Chiss, which of course is the race of Thrawn's people. This is the first time in Star Wars continuity, in terms of the chronology of the EU, at least at this point in this era, that anybody's ever heard of a Chiss in the Republic space. Now, Star Wars: The Old Republic, the MMO, does feature Chiss, so maybe you could play around with that idea and say, okay, well, the Chiss were in previous centuries past, available in the Republic, but not now. So the Chiss are this new race. They're unlike anything that Cardass and his crew has ever seen. The huts who have followed Cardass start to fight, try to shoot at the Chiss. The Chiss just take them out like that. Just put a net over the ship, just boom, just easily overcome, easily conquered. Cardass and his crew, at least they have the mindset not to fight back, just to submit. And we find that they're boarded, or they bring the ship onto the Chiss ship, and they meet the leader, Thrawn. And again, there's a lot more in detail that you'll want to go through and read this, but we meet Thrawn. He's a fascinating character. He's not an evil bad guy as we meet him here. but they're concerned because this is a very powerful race, a powerful commander of this ship who is able to just do, their fate is in his hands easily. And he's very cold, very calculating, not unkind. They're hoping he doesn't find out about them being a smuggler because they've got some jewels sewed into some of the garments they're supposed to be delivering. He does. He finds this out. He's very much somebody who just wants to learn. He wants knowledge. He's, again, if you take the detective archetype like as a hero, but make it a villain, somebody like a Professor Moriarty or something like that. Although, again, in this book, Thrawn isn't a villain. He's not the villain we know him to be in the Thrawn trilogy later when he's an admiral of the Empire. Here, he's simply a commander of his own race's ship and so forth, and he wants to figure out what's going on with these people. He takes a liking to Cardass because he sees in Cardass somebody just as curious as he is, somebody a little more able to read situations. Cardass, for example, knows you don't lie to Thrawn. Thrawn will, he's like a Sherlock. He will know. He'll figure it out if you're lying to him, So Thrawn takes a liking to Cardass. They decide they're going to teach each other their languages because the only way they're able to communicate is by using a trade language of this trade group on the very, very outer rim. So just sort of a race of beings that are somewhat, in between their two parts of space. Cybisti is the language that they use. So it's interesting place to be in. Within the 3 chapters, though, we suddenly jump. We jump over to the Republic. And again, this is during the Clone Wars. So we have Palpatine is the Chancellor. And we are now in the perspective of a Padawan, a Jedi Padawan by the name of Lorana Jinsler. And we find out that she's the Padawan of this Jedi Knight named Jeruis Sabaoth. Now, if you've read the Thrawn trilogy, you know we had a clone of Jeruis Sabaoth who was a bit unhinged. And now we're meeting the real Jeruis Sabaoth, again, who's a little unhinged. This is a very, you wonder, how is this man even still a Jedi Knight? And we learned that Mace Windu, is a little suspicious of him. He wants to send Obi-Wan and Anakin on to kind of shadow him in this mission that he goes off on. But we first meet Jeruis Sabaoth busting into Palpatine's office, demanding his support for something called the Outbound Flight. And we find out that this Outbound Flight idea was a plan to get a bunch of settlers and a bunch of resources and hopefully even Jedi Knights, Jeruis Sabaoth hopes, on a ship that's designed to go out into long range space, designed to go out into those unknown regions, like where Cardass is right now, to plant settlements, expand the Republic, learn things, perhaps, all these kinds of stuff. We find out that Sabaoth has ulterior motives about it. He wants to take the Jedi away and sort of seed them out somewhere because he thinks something dark is coming, which is obviously Palpatine's Order 66, in the end. But we have some interesting characters here and interesting inner workings because we've also read Darth Plagueis, which is the story of Palpatine's master. And we did a wonderful book study of that. You can go back in the videos and look. It's really interesting stuff. And we meet Doriana, this henchman or underling of Palpatine's as well. We find some really cool wheels within wheels stuff going on here. For example, Doriana is loyal to Palpatine. He's one of his, aides there. But then we find out Doriana is also secretly working for this Lord Sidious that he doesn't know is the same person as Palpatine. And Palpatine sends him on a mission, and Lord Sidious says, okay, while you're doing that for Palpatine, secretly do this. So some wheels within wheels, action going on there. We know that there's going to be a lot of schemes and whatnot in this book. So we're getting to laying to some of those themes. But you think, okay, how did you jump from this tense scene where in the outer reaches of space, oh my gosh, what's going to happen? And you jump to the Republic and we get some sort of political turmoil. How are you going to keep readers interested? Well, the key and how are you going to keep the themes linked? The key is that we link it with Jinsler's perspective. We find out that she, just like Cardass, is a young person, a very perceptive, very intelligent young person, sort of at the mercy of her boss, right? At the mercy of Sabaoth, just as Cardass is at the mercy of his idiot captain, and then at the mercy of certainly Thrawn while they're there. So the themes mesh pretty well there. We know that these are our 2 perspectives we're going to be going through. It's really fascinating stuff. We do find some seeds are planted about what Thrawn has to do. He's got people that he needs to answer to as well. He agrees to send them on their way eventually, but let them stay for a little bit so that he can learn their language. Now we find out that Lorana Jinsler with Sabaoth, they're being sent off to go dispute this trade deal or whatever Palpatine has asked them to do. He said, if you do that for me, then I'll try to push your outbound flight idea. Mace Windu has called in Obi-Wan and Anakin and wants them to go kind of tail Drew Sabaoth a little bit under the guise of helping him, being of help, but to keep an eye on him a little bit. So we're seeing things develop here. We're seeing parallels with Cardass and Ginsler. We're seeing parallels of the master student. You know, we're seeing all this kind of come together. One of the things I like to do with these book studies is build on themes as we go through. That catches you up just a little bit. Again, we went a lot deeper in our discussion, which had the audio issues, and we'll go deeper in the next one. We don't like to go over an hour with these book studies, which is why we're only going to be talking about 3 chapters at a time. So in the next book study, we'll probably just do it as a live stream again. I was thinking about maybe doing these as part of the podcast or as pre-recorded. As much as I hate scheduling a time that I have to come do a live stream, I think they probably just work best like that. So that's the plan right now anyway. But if this is interesting to you at all, read chapters 1 through 3 of Outbound Flight. If you still like it, go ahead and read through chapter 6, because that's the next time we come together and do a live stream in about a weekish, maybe a little over. We'll be talking about chapters 4 through 6, and we'll just keep going 3 chapters at a time for about 40 minutes to an hour each session, at least a week or so apart, and we'll get through the book, and that's how we do it. And then we'll go through another book and figure out the next one we want to do. But the EU is just such a wonderful place to spend time in if you're a Star Wars fan, and if you can't stand what Disney's done to Star Wars, good news, you've got a whole decade's worth of books, video games, comics, all kinds of content, you know, short stories and whatnot that are there at your fingertips to really spend a lot more time in this universe, even as somebody reading things for the first time, reading things anew. So hope you stick it around. Hope you like that. We'll be back soon enough with that, and I'll be back with more of my own usual content. But until next time, keep enjoying and digging deeper into the true blue Star Wars stories you love. Thanks for watching.